Hello and welcome to The Law According To. For this episode, I'm joined by Kerry Leigh Upton. Kerry is a solicitor with Southampton City Council, and she tells me all about her career to date, including how in-house law was seldom discussed as an option during her qualifications and her training period. And she also talks passionately about the work she's now doing for the council. If you like this episode, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to receive notification of future episodes. This is The Law According to Kerry Leigh Upton. Hello and welcome to The Law According To. I'm Mike Minnis of 2M Legal, and today I'm joined by Kerry Leigh Upton, a solicitor with Southampton City Council. Welcome, Kerry.
Hi, Mike. Nice to be here.
So, Kerry, this is all about your career, and you are the first person on the podcast who is an in-house solicitor. So it'd be great to hear a slightly different kind of journey, I suppose. So, but let's hear about that journey. So, how did it all start for you?
Well, I started in private practice, as most people do, but I initially wanted to do animal law, funnily enough, which is quite a niche area. But I kind of fell into commercial, as most people do, and do property law. I spent most of my career and all of my training in private practice, doing predominantly property, bit of litigation, some wills and probate. And I decided after about 3 years PQE that it wasn't for me. And I wasn't really aware of my options at the time. So I started doing a bit of looking around and became familiar with the in-house position. So I did a bit of research around that, and I decided to go with a government in-house position because for me personally, I do quite a lot of charity work and I really enjoy giving back, and that's a big part of the job for me. So that really appealed to me and something I wasn't actually aware of in my training, which I wish I had have been at the time. But it's been a fantastic move for me. I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, it's important, I think, to know your options, that there are more options out there other than just private practice. But it's been a great move for me so far.
Okay, excellent. So just picking up on a couple of things there. So firstly, you mentioned it around about 3 years that you weren't particularly happy with the direction you were traveling in. What was it in particular about private practice that you kind of maybe weren't particularly enjoying?
I think from my perspective, when you study law, you have this idea in your mind that it's going to be a bit like Suits, I suppose, and it never is. But I think from my perspective personally, I found it quite about fees a lot of the time and about how much you brought in every month. But when I was in private practice, I did quite a lot of work for charities. So it was a lot harder for me to meet my bill deadlines, because I found that I was working for a lot of charities at a discounted rate. And it became more and more about the money and how much you were bringing in, and about marketing as well, which I did really enjoy for a good period of my time in private practice. But it got to the point where I decided that I really wanted to go back into the law and it be a bit more about the law rather than maybe promoting yourself and, raising as many fees. And I decided that I was going to take that jump for that reason. And my personal role at the moment is fantastic for that, because I make a big difference within the community, which is what I was looking to do. And I feel like I'm putting my education, I suppose, to good practice. So it's a really good move for me.
Yeah, excellent. And so you mentioned that your private practice was kind of really the only route that was open to you when you were training. Was there no mention even during your degree or anything like that about other routes available to you, or was it purely focused on private practice?
I suppose that they did mention it, but it's not something that they consistently talk about when you're training. From my experience, it might be slightly different now, but back when I was training, and especially when you're doing your degree and your legal practice course, which I think it's now changed slightly, the way of qualifying, but you did a lot of litigation and wills and probate, property, family law, and they were kind of the areas that were constantly mentioned. So I suppose you're conditioned to thinking that they're the predominant areas that you go into, and you have to enjoy one of those. And for me, I found family quite difficult, and criminal wasn't for me either. So it left me an option that in my mind I only did because I felt like it was all I could do in the private practice environment. So it's quite nice to know from my perspective now that there are, even now I'm more than happy in my job, but there are so many different areas I could go into if I wanted to. It's not just those few areas that you're sort of conditioned to think are the main ones. And I suppose that's because it's quite a competitive world, and they're the main ones that have the most availability, I suppose. But yeah, I think it would have been helpful for me when I was training or even a junior, just to know that there are far more avenues out there rather than just the main private practice areas that I suppose we're used to seeing. And if they do work for you, that's fantastic. But if they don't, there are other options out there. And working in house is nice because you also have that environment around you of they're your colleagues as well as your clients, which is slightly concept, that you get to know them personally. So the job, in my view, becomes slightly easier because you know that client personally and you know what they're after, their abilities. And I find it's a lot smoother than it was in private practice from my perspective, where you worked with, say, different clients every week and you never really got to know them on a personal level, and perhaps it did feel a bit impersonal, whereas now it's a lot more one-on-one, and it's a nicer environment, in my opinion.
Yeah, where you're seeing these people literally, well, not literally, but almost every day, and understanding them personally, their personalities, their family, and and everything about them really, and it must make a huge difference to you, what you're doing. You can support them in what they need. I suppose a private practice lawyer would say they do know their clients, and I'm sure they do, but it's not to that same level, is it? Because you're not spending so much time with them on an everyday basis.
No, and you can be far more honest. I mean, we're all human at the end of the day. I think people look at solicitors like we're not, but we are just human, and we have good days and we have bad days. And when you get that good relationship with your client, you can actually say to them, you know what, I'm having a bad day today, so I'll look at that tomorrow. And that's something you just would never be able to do in private practice. And in my mind, it takes the pressure off as well, because you can just pick up the phone to your colleague and talk about, that webinar that you both just attended, but then also you go on to talk about work, or you bump into them in the civic and then you see how was your holiday, and then you start talking about work. It's not just work related, which is really nice, because you do, and you get how they work as well, because I find sometimes in private practice how you come across can be misunderstood because you're not sure what level of experience that person has, whereas in my role I know exactly all of my clients, what they feel they know and what they feel like they would need more help with. And I find that makes my job easier because I'm not repeating myself for every transaction. I'm sort of starting where I already know they're comfortable, which is a really nice way of working.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So obviously, you've mentioned there about the I suppose the challenge of not really knowing the routes available to you until later in your career, or once your career started. What other challenges have you had to overcome in the early parts of your career so far?
Well, where do I start? I think we
Is there a
all,
few?
we all have the similar challenges. Mine personally would be the normal trying to find a training contract. That's always been difficult, and I appreciate they're trying to make that a bit more flexible now as to how you can qualify, which is fantastic. But the early challenges started with, I suppose, when I was training, I did 7 days a week for years because I did my legal practice course and my master's at the same time as my training contract, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best idea. But when you're young, you have that type of energy, I suppose. And I think it was a lot of pressure, but I also qualified extremely young because I did it all at the same time, which in my mind as a early 20s sounded fantastic. But actually, it gave you a lot of imposter syndrome when you qualify as a lawyer at, say, 25, and you've been given all this responsibility, and you've not got enough life experience to deal with it. So that was a big challenge for me. And I think also being taken seriously by more experienced solicitors when you are very junior is another challenge I've faced quite frequently. But I think the main one for me is confidence in my abilities, which I think is not spoken about enough, because I think when you are training, you have this mindset of you're going to qualify and just know everything that day you qualify. And I think that never happens, if I'm honest. You're always still fumbling your way through and trying to find the bit of information that you thought you knew. And I think I'm learning, the more and more experience I get, is that you just need to know where to look and who to ask. You're never going to know everything, but as a team you do. So there's no shame in saying I don't know that, so I'll check with a colleague, which is also lovely to work in-house, because I don't think that would have been taken so kindly perhaps in private practice. But from my perspective, I can go to my colleague and say, I'm not sure about that, but my colleague is very experienced in that area, so I'm going to pass you over to them. And it's a really nice environment because within your team, there's no judgment or criticism. You're just learning together, and you're not afraid to say, I don't know, or, well, actually, I thought this, but maybe that's a better way of working. And I think that's a major challenge for me, just to feel confident in my abilities and learn that just because I don't know everything, that doesn't mean I'm not good or capable at my job. And I think that's a really nice hurdle to have overcome at such an early stage in my career.
Yeah, it sounds like a really supportive kind of environment that you're working in, and I think that's kind of crucial, isn't it? Whether you're whether you're 10 years PQE or 1 year PQE, just having those people to be able to have the confidence, if you like, to know that you're not going to be kind of ridiculed or anything like that, or come on, you should know that, and for them to actually be able to support you in that in any sort of information that it is, because ultimately, even if you are 10, 15, 20 years PQE, you're still learning. And I think if you, once you stop getting to that stage where you feel you're not learning anymore, well, where do you go from there? Nobody knows everything, do they? But that sounds really good that you can kind of have that confidence to be able to just go to others and say, look, I need a little bit of support here, or actually probably you'll be better dealing with this because it's more your area of expertise. It's exactly what you need, isn't it?
Exactly. I think an important part of the job is a supportive environment, not being afraid to say one day you're struggling or your caseload's too heavy. And if you're in an environment where you can't say that, I would say that you're in the wrong environment, because it does exist.
Mm,
And it took me perhaps years to find that environment. And I was starting to believe myself that perhaps it didn't exist. And that just was the way of the law, that was the environment and the job, and that was part of it. So to find such a supportive environment and find that that's not the job at all, it was just the environment
mm,
perhaps put into, is a really lovely thing. And I think it's something that I would say to anyone that's listening. If you are one of those people in an environment where you don't feel supported, then there are environments out there where you can be, and it really does change not only your mindset but also your capabilities, because the less stressed you are, the better you are at your job. I think that's really important.
mm.
It comes out naturally in you, your confidence, rather than being afraid to speak out and perhaps say that you need a bit more assistance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say about kind of imposter syndrome, because that's something we do hear quite a lot, and not necessarily quite often from people who are on the podcast or people that we interview for jobs and things like that. But obviously, part of that is having that support network where you can go to people. But how do you overcome that other than having the support network? Is there anything you do personally that helps you overcome the kind of imposter syndrome side of things? Such as kind of I don't know, meditation or self affirmations or anything like that.
I do everything you could possibly think of. I think I'm not afraid to say that I've suffered with quite bad anxiety, work anxiety in my past, because I think when you
Mm,
do a career this stressful, it's inevitable, really, and it's an important job at the end of the day, and that's drilled into you throughout your training. And I know they have to do that to make a point of how
mm,
important the role is, but it's not nice to spend years of your life being, it told to you how important your job is. And I think that can be
yeah.
quite scary to someone young that doesn't perhaps understand the implications. And I think what I found over the years, which has been really lovely, is how speak out to you once you speak out to them. And I think when I was training, I would never mention anything about anxiety. I would pretend everything was fine and I was doing really well. When inside, I was perhaps struggling with imposter syndrome, but also
Mm,
doing something wrong, because in my head I thought, because I'm a lawyer, I have to do everything correctly, which is not right. Human error is human error. Everybody makes mistakes. And I've always been told, which I think is a great bit of advice from an old manager of mine, to say that as long as you're honest, then you can't go too far wrong, because a judge has never struck anyone off for being honest. It's
mm,
that's the issue. So as long as you do your best at the time with what you have, it's always going to end as best as it could have done in the circumstances. And I think that's really important. So for me, I've opened up to many managers, colleagues over the years, and they've opened up back. And just to have those conversations and know that the imposter syndrome's in everyone, managing directors, partners, the highest level you could think of, chief executives, they all feel what you feel. They just don't
mm,
know about it perhaps. And when you start talking about it and they talk back, you feel very supported, and it kind of eases it in itself, because you know that you're all in the same position. And then you get a better relationship with your colleagues. And I think if you open up like that and it's not met well, then you're not in the right environment. So it's, for me, I've done a lot of self-care, like you say, meditation, etc. But I think what works for me most in the working environment is just discussion and open and honesty, which is really lovely. But in a personal capacity, I do a lot of yoga and meditation, but I also have flexi time, which is fantastic in my job, because, for example, using Mondays as an example, I had quite a stressful morning, and it was a sunny
mhm.
afternoon. I decided to log off that day at 3 o'clock and go down the beach and have a swim, because I wasn't in the best frame of mind.
Fabulous.
Yeah, balance, work life balance. I logged in on Tuesday and had a really long day, and I was very productive because I'd had that good day prior. So I think
Yeah, amazing.
in law of you need to work 12 hours a day to be good at your job is something that needs to be completely forgotten, because as long as you do your job in the time frame that it allows, then the rest of it should be your time, and then that will in itself make your performance better.
Yeah, that's amazing that you have that flexibility. I'm a great believer in, because recruitment is similar in a way where people look at time at desk and things like that, and obviously we record billings and things. I'm a great believer in kind of the outcomes rather than the face time, if you like, the amount of time you sat at your desk. If someone can achieve the same in 5 hours than somebody else can do in 10 hours, well, fair play to them. And it's hats off, and let them enjoy the rest of their day or however they want to work their week. It's about, as long as the job is done and done effectively, that's the most important thing, isn't it?
I agree. Time management is key, I think. Time management,
Yeah.
organisation, and a work-life balance. And if you can master those things, then the rest of it comes naturally.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so you talked a little bit about success there with your flexibility, but let's move on to the successes you've had throughout your career. So I do think, getting a job where you are flexible and you feel supported and things like that, I think that is a success, and I don't think people necessarily celebrate that enough. But let's talk about maybe more kind of, if you like, tangible successes within your career. Which ones, kind of, what highlights would you say you can share with us?
Yeah, so work successes, of course, I can't give too many details for confidential.
Sure.
But I've recently done quite a high profile, what I would call, I know people talk about high value transactions with fear, but it was a very, very high value transaction, and it was nerve wracking because it is a lot of pressure, but we had an extremely tight deadline, and I managed to, I think I had a few days to spare, which was really unexpected, but it was such a lovely feeling to sort of interlink the work successes and personal successes, of that I didn't let my fears overtake me during that transaction. I just went with it. I trusted my judgment, and I managed to get it over the line in such a tight time frame, and that was very important for the council to get that done. So it was a lovely feeling to have achieved that, and I got such lovely comments from colleagues and clients back that it was a really lovely moment for me. But in my past private practice, I suppose I've done some charity work, which I was really pleased with. I managed to get a forever home, we called it, secured for a charity that was looking for somewhere to have as their main point of meeting, which was a really lovely feeling. That completed, because you worked very closely with this charity, and you knew how important it was to them. So to actually get it done and know that they've got that forever home secured, and that you've negotiated good terms for them, was a really lovely feeling. So I think that's my main one in my career. I've had quite a few residential transactions that have been lovely, smaller but more meaningful, one-on-one. I've had a newly, she was pregnant, heavily pregnant actually, when we were due to complete, and she actually had the baby when we were about to complete, so we had to sort of delay that.
Wow.
But we managed to get her in instantly, pretty much, so she could come home into that property. Little things like that for me mean more, one-on-one transactions. But I think I've done a lot of things in my career that are personally successful. I wouldn't call it successful generally, but for me it felt lovely to be a part of that and actually make a difference, which I think is ultimately why a lot of people do become solicitors, because they want to make a difference. So when you actually get to do it, lovely.
Yeah, it's amazing. Just out of interest, is there a difference between private practice and in-house? When you have a particular win, if you like, is there a difference to the way that is received in the different environments?
I think so. I think it depends on your manager, I suppose, because in private practice, it's important to that individual client, and perhaps because you've been so involved in that transaction, your colleagues and your management may not be aware of how important that was, because they've got their own clientele and they've got their own deadlines to meet. So you're kind of celebrating it as a solo win, I suppose. At a previous firm I worked at, we had something which we really, really enjoyed. We had a bell that we rung every time that we completed. And then we had to sort of say what we'd done and then write it in a book. And I thought that was fantastic. Shout out to Graham, who was a great manager and used to make us feel part of a team with our wins. But perhaps other environments that wasn't as known, and you sort of celebrated your win on your own and went home. And then maybe it felt less of a win, I suppose. Whereas where I am now, because they are your colleagues, you're all involved in it, and you all know how important things are. And your management know how important it is, because they're passing the duties on to you. So when you do those small wins, they feel much bigger, because you've got that support network around you of that you've all as a team been trying to get there, even if you on your own have been dealing with the matter. So you definitely feel like you're more appreciated, I think, from my perspective, because you're all in it together and you're all trying to get there. So when you do, when you pull it all together, it's a really lovely feeling. And then you have a lot more trust from your colleagues and your management and your clients, because they know that when you need to get the job done, you will, and then you all relax in that. And it's a really lovely environment.
Yeah, it's kind of like a holistic team win rather than an individual win.
It feels that way. I think in private practice, you just feel a bit more solo. You've got your billing deadline, you've got your clientele, and you just get on with your job and perhaps go home and forget about it, as it were, and move on to the next one. Whereas you don't feel like that in the role I'm in personally at the moment. I feel like we're all a team and we're all getting there together. And when we do, we all celebrate it. And when we need help, we call on each other. And it's a really lovely environment.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's kind of less transactional in a way as well, isn't it? Because you're all working together, and it's not like on to the next one sort of scenario.
It feels that way. And quite often, as soon as you have done one, the next thing comes along. I'm not saying it's a perfect world, because it never is in the legal sector, but you do feel like it's remembered, shall we say, or when it comes to, say, the next transaction, and you say, well, actually, we perhaps need to do it this way rather than this way, from which we've just learned. They go, oh yeah, of course, and then you learn from it, and it intertwines, which is quite nice. So I feel like every small win leads up to a slightly bigger win, because the next transaction you can maybe do slightly more slicker, because you've learned from the previous one, and you're often dealing with the same clients, so they're familiar with what they're doing, and it's important to them as well, which makes it important to you. So yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. So I think you've kind of imparted quite a bit of advice in the earlier part of the podcast, but specifically, what advice would you give to people who are in the early stages of their career, maybe struggling, whether it be mentally or with I know some people struggle with, is this the right career for me? Have I made a right choice? I've gone through all this training. I'm at the stage now where I'm becoming a solicitor or a lawyer, or even a paralegal, or whatever stage they may well be. What advice would you give to those people at that stage who are kind of suffering maybe a bit of imposter syndrome, a little bit of self-doubt, whatever it may be?
I could be here all day, so I'll try and keep it brief. I've already mentioned, as I've said, always be honest and talk. I've always been told, and I think it's a great bit of advice, you're better off losing your job than your career. So if you're asked to do something you're not comfortable with, or your gut instinct tells you to do it, don't do it. There are support lines, which I've only recently found out about, that I wasn't aware of, which the Law Society have, which you can actually ring and ask for guidance, which I think is really important to know.
Okay.
If you're unsure about a specific issue, you can actually ring someone out of your work environment and get their opinion on it, which is really helpful. But I think from a mental health perspective, always put that first, always, no matter what anyone in your firm tells you, because without that, you can't do your job anyway. We are replaceable. They can replace you the next day. So don't ever think that you can't have a day off if you're not feeling up to it, or if you feel like you can't do something, just say it. We are all human. I think if you do all of these things and it's met negatively, then perhaps look at moving on to a better working environment, because they are out there, as I've said. But most importantly, you're not stuck. I think a lot of people think, oh, well, I've been pushed into this area and I've qualified into this area and it's not for me, but I'm stuck here now because I did all that education and I've spent all that time on it. And they just sit there unhappy. But I think that's what I did for a while. And I think it's really important to know there are other options. You can work in-house, you can work in government, you can do other things really and not be a solicitor, but still use all of your skills and I've got a colleague at the moment who's stepping down from being a solicitor but not quite ready to retire, so he's decided to go into the client area, and he's actually going to become our client now rather than being.
Oh wow.
So there are lots of things you can do with your skills, with your knowledge. You don't have to just do what you're doing now, and there are plenty of people out there that will actually be willing to and more than happy to talk to you and help you. So for example, if after this you want to talk to me directly on LinkedIn, I'll be more than happy to discuss things with you. You're not alone in it. I think you've got a lot more people out there that are willing to help and support you than you think. And yeah, just always be honest, be open, and go with your gut, because it knows more than you do. That's what I've found.
That's amazing. And then it's surprising how many options there are actually available, isn't it? I think a lot of people like yourself see the kind of glamorous side of law when they go into it and think, well, this is what it's all going to be about, sharp suits and and work hard, play hard sort of environment. But the reality is especially if you're in the kind of criminal law, you can be in some pretty seedy sort of situations, can't you? Quite often. But there's so many different aspects to law, and like you say, not just in the private practice side of things. in-house law options across the board, isn't there? There's many options that you can go down. But that's really, I think the helpline is really good. I've not heard of that before, so I think if we can get the details, it'd be good to actually include those in the comments of the podcast on YouTube. And if you're happy for me to do so, I know you mentioned about LinkedIn there. I'll include your link there as well.
Yeah, of course. More than happy to.
Excellent. Well, Kerry, I really appreciate your time. I think it's been so much you've shared today, which I think will be really useful for many people, not necessarily just people who are kind of at the early stages of their career, but also maybe people who are a bit of a crossroads, not really sure where they want to go. But I think the key things, being able to be honest, and if you're not able to be honest, you've got to question your environment, whether it's actually the right place that's for you at this time in your career. Probably it's not. But I really appreciate your time. Thanks very much for coming on the podcast. It's been really good speaking to you.
You're more than welcome, and you, Mike.